like me has always been there. But now it's awake. And I need help.
Hi folks, I'm Ignatiy Vishnevetsky.
I'm Alex Dowd.
Today we're talking about Star Wars: The Last Jedi.
Welcome to Film Club.
The Last Jedi, middle entry in the new third Star Wars trilogy, is about, I think, as idiosyncratic as one of these movies is likely to get. It's very operatic in other spots fairly wacky. And it really goes back to the source material of the original film, which is samurai films, especially Akira Kurosawa films, from which this lifts a lot in terms of things like texture. There's a lot of rain. There's a lot of cinders and ash, and also a particular framing device that it uses at one point.
Yes, there's
has a certain Rashomon influence.
Yeah. Well, in visual components too. I mean, Darth Vader has always been sort of a space samurai, but I mean, it takes it even further in this when you have henchmen who are basically wearing this boxy red samurai armor.
Yeah,
you know?
The lightsaber battles here, which I'd say are probably the best in the series, other than I still think the Darth Maul fight in The Phantom Menace is really fun.
Very good.
I think second to that, this is probably the best of the longer lightsaber battles in this sequence. Yeah, it really takes it back to those roots, but also to World War II. This is a film that takes a detour into what is essentially Monaco mixed with Morocco. There's a Casablanca vibe. You've got Benicio del Toro popping up as kind of a Peter Lorre character. There's a definite 40s, late 30s section of this film.
I think that's why it makes sense that Rian Johnson stepped in to direct this film. Now, Johnson made Brick, he made The Brothers Bloom, and he made Looper, I think, which are all movies that are very steeped in cinematic influence. You know, he's a guy who's always been willing to sort of take the stuff that interests him and mix it together and rearrange it.
But also pulp literary influences, anime influences. There's a very anime-like, a great moment in this film that I'm not going to spoil. That is a very anime-like, let's say, destruction of a spacecraft.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
I think it's easy to get caught up in talking about this as spectacle, as something that's often very visually arresting with its kind of very reduced white stripes color palette of white, black, and red. But the fact is that this is maybe the funniest of the films in the series, but in ways that are always unexpected and often somewhat dark.
Well, I mean, the movie basically begins with a crank call joke, which I actually thought maybe was a little too far. Like, I was like, this is getting a little too close to, like, Spaceballs. Yeah, I think that what Johnson does is he brings that pastiche quality back to Star Wars, because if you look at Force Awakens, which I thought was good, I think we both liked.
Yeah, it's enjoyable.
Yeah, but that film's lone kind of source of reference is A New Hope.
And I think we talked about this, way back, it seems like way back when. It's actually quite recent when The Force Awakens opened. That the original, that A New Hope is a pastiche of so many influences that are really all over it. And the problem with The Force Awakens, its weakness is it's a pastiche of a pastiche.
Exactly. And my big problem with that film was that it was so beholden to A New Hope and to what they were clearly trying to do is sort of, they were like, you didn't like the prequels, so we're going to take it back to its roots. And I thought it was a little too conservative in sort of replicating the beats of that movie. Now, this film, there are elements of this film that blatantly recall The Empire Strikes Back, the second film in Lucas's original trilogy. I mean, there's a scene on a planet that's basically Hoth. You know, you get the AT,
but it's covered in
walkers.
salt.
Covered in salt.
That's
right.
a difference.
It is different.
Probably hurts a lot more, if you fall down with an open wound.
But for the most part, this captures the values of The Empire Strikes Back, as opposed to just replicating scenes from it and some of its effects.
You're right. It really is trying to sort of go back to the core influences of the original films and build something from there. And it's taking it in particular directions that the series hasn't gone. It kind of embraces the mysticism of the Force, I think, in a way that the previous films haven't.
For one thing, I would say it visualizes the idea of the dark side in a way that I don't think the movies ever have. He actually is taking something that's been primarily abstract in those films, there is this dark power that could draw you, and trying to visualize it in some way. This is one of the first Star Wars movies that I think legitimately makes the dark side feel like a seductive force as well. And so much of that, I think, is Adam Driver. I think he's really pretty terrific as the villain of these movies. And he's different than any villain we've ever seen in a Star Wars movie. He's more sensitive in a lot of ways. And the movie comes up with a really terrific device, which is that Kylo Ren, the villain he plays, and Rey, our sort of main character played by Daisy Ridley, sort of end up in this psychic communion that happens, that neither of them knows how it happens, but they're sort of communicating with each other with millions of miles away from each other.
And I like that Johnson has all of the special effects budget. You know, if you want to talk about what filmmakers do and don't do, Johnson has this huge special effects budget that he can marshal. And there's no special effect behind this, really.
Right, it's just editing. And
yeah,
it's just
entirely
where
editing.
they're looking.
Yeah.
And he conveys the idea that they're seeing through each other's eyes through basic technique, you know?
Yeah.
I think it's a brilliant idea, and it allows these two to interact with each other in a way that's totally different than the way that the villains and the heroes in these movies normally interact.
Yeah, because they usually just, they see each other once, they fight,
Right.
and then...
One of the things I never bought was that the idea that Luke was ever actually seduced by the dark side. You know, anytime he runs into Darth Vader, there's this giant basso-voiced space samurai being like, "Come to my side." It's like there's never any actual seductive element
how much
there.
time do they really get to spend together over the course of
They don't
3
spend,
films?
like, maybe a few scenes.
Yeah, like it was like 15 minutes of real life.
Yeah. But this film actually does the work to suggest that, and I think so much of it is Driver's performance, is that he is a seductive presence in the film. He's using a kind of seductive logic to say, "Come to my side." I think ultimately that this is a middle chapter in a lot of ways, but in a lot of really strong ways. It doesn't have to do what The Force Awakens does, which is introduce all these new characters. It doesn't have to wrap up the story that they started telling. It can just have fun in this world. It's 2.5 hours. It plows forward. I don't think everything in it works. I think that there are some bum notes here and there. I think the stuff in Space Casablanca doesn't really work great. But I watched this thing and I think, Disney has made it so that there's going to be a Star Wars movie a year into perpetuity. And that freaks me out a little bit. I don't know if we need that many of these things. But you look at this film, this sort of fun, zippy, operatic movie, and I think, if this can be the model for what Star Wars can be going forward, maybe it's not such a bad thing.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.